Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our commitment is to help, hope, and healing of our veteran family and our nation. I'm Jim Blythe, a U.S. Navy veteran and a certified senior advisor. Join us as we continue the mission of leadership and commitment to our communities and our great country. Why, you never know where we're going to go or who you're going to meet. We invite you to join in, plug in, and share in what we do. This is your Veterans Impact Show. I'm Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy veteran. Joining me in the studio, Mark Liebman, Captain, United States Navy, retired, rotor head, better known as helicopter pilot, tremendous author. You've got 17 books, of which
there's now 20.
20. Okay, how many of them have made Amazon bestseller list? Six. Well, doggone, I mean to tell you, you got to teach a course on that. Oh, you do. Joining us, two tremendous people. We had them on before. We just had them at the National Defense Briefing Series last night, and it was so well received, and there was so much that we decided to do this again because a lot of people are interested what's going on in China. So this is an especially amazing program with Captain Bud Cole, U.S. Navy retired, doctor, PhD, and his beautiful wife, Cynthia, doctor, PhD, Cynthia Watkins. So welcome aboard from Annapolis, right?
Yes, from Annapolis, the banks of Spa Creek.
The banks of Spa Creek.
How fun is that? Well, again, we want to thank you for the tremendous job you did last night. And we're going to take to another step further because Mark, he's really got some great questions that came in from last night. So a lot of people are really concerned because there's, I think, a lot of fake news, a lot of incendiary news going on about China, American relations, what's going on with China and Japan, Iran. So, Mark, start us off.
Yeah, so one of the outgrowths of last night was that we got a lot of questions that we never got to. So some of those questions we're going to cover today, and some of the questions, we've got some additional ones. So what I'm going to start with is just some simple questions just to get the conversation going. And so this is a political issue, and most people may or may not know that the PRC has its own version of the internet. And the question now becomes, how long does the CCP believe they can maintain control of that and limiting access by the Chinese people to the rest of the world?
They think they can do it for a very long time. There are certain things that worry them more than others, and that's anything that might incite an aggregation of people that they not anticipate. That's probably the thing that worries them the most. They like predictability, and they worry that the internet can be used that way. That's one of the reasons why they really did not like the color revolutions or the Middle East revolutions in the 00s and then in the 010s. But they believe that they can do that because the party believes, and seems to be some evidence of this, that they have a bargain with the population. And that is they will provide a better standard of living, and the population will tolerate some of the restrictions that we would never tolerate. But I think that they believe they can continue this into the foreseeable future.
So that brings up an interesting point because one of the outgrowths of COVID was that the Chinese literally forced its population in several cities to stay in their apartments and not go out. And so what you're telling me is that they're not afraid of the fallout from that?
No. They've got the control. They've got the ability in many cases, not everything. There, as I said, there are things that scare them, but the Chinese have invested in domestic security, and there is more of a compliance to a sense of societal need than what we have. We're individualists. We believe in individual rights. That's not something that is endemic in China. Of course, there are individuals who would like to have more religious freedom, might like to have more economic freedom. But the reality is that many of them believe that the collective is more important than the individual.
I think one of the big things that I have heard from other speakers is food insecurity. They're more insecure about being able to maintain a standard of living. You made a point last night that with the advent of Xi coming in, he's done everything he could to raise their standard of living.
Every leader, the second generation leader, Deng Xiaoping, who took over in the mid 1970s when Mao died, Hu Jintao, who was the fourth generation, Zhu Rongji, who is the third generation, and now Xi Jinping, all of them want to increase the standard of living. That's part of that implied social contract. And I don't think we should automatically assume that they do it purely for cynical reasons. They believe in the Chinese people.
Do you think that, or how do you think the Europeans view the PRC? Do you see them as do you think they see them as a market? Do you think they see them as a competitor or a threat, or all three?
All three. I don't know. You have a different answer to that?
No, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, they're happy with the trading relationship. Right now, they're in the midst of ongoing throes about unfair advantages on each side. The fact of the matter is, as we mentioned last night, China being every Asian country's largest trading partner, they're also an extremely valuable trading partner to all the European nations.
So, but if there was a conflict and suddenly sanctions were imposed, because the Chinese economy is based on exports. So if sanctions were imposed or trade was reduced, let's say 10, 12% or some number, what would happen? And where do you think the breaking point is in a reduction of trade?
Well, that's very hard. I'll let Cynthia take a stab at that. My field is not economics, except I will note that it's going to have to be a very high threshold of a very high cut in trade before it has any impact, I think, on China's economy.
We have one case we can look back on that is, I think, quite educational. And that is what happened after the Tiananmen Square incident on June 4th, 1989, when Europe, in conjunction with the George H.W. Bush administration, imposed some fairly harsh sanctions, because Europe is far more concerned with what we would call human rights issues than we have ever been. And China wrote it out. And within a year to year and a half, the Europeans were coming back and we were coming back. But I would also just remind everyone that we have seen, and I mean we in the United States, but also the Europeans, have seen the hope of getting into the Chinese market, because it is so vast, as a central tenet of our relationship for now 200 years. And it's easy to forget that, but we want to sell every China person a match, or we today would like to sell them other things.
I'll also note, Mark, that every presidential candidate since Bill Clinton, maybe before, has run on a basis of punishing China for human rights violations, then getting into office and apparently learning about how incredibly important the economic trade relationship is between the United States and China and between our allies in China, and backing off the human rights element in the policy.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears to the Arabian Gulf. It's been in the news a bit that the PRC is supporting the Iranians with intelligence, with weapons and stuff like that. So it's really a two-part question. What do you think the U.S. should do or can do about it? And the other part of the question is how valuable do you think the PRC views the Iranian relationship, besides the fact that it buys much of its oil from them?
Well, I think that the second part of your statement says it all. They really want the Iranian oil availability. As far as the first part is concerned, it goes to that old saying about when your opponent is making a mistake, don't interrupt them. I think they view the U.S. War in Iran as an American mistake of high strategic order, and they are probably providing Iran. I have no definite knowledge about what's being provided, but as is the case with Moscow, they're probably providing Tehran with just enough to maintain a positive relationship and to help the Iranians, who have been, we have to remember, the Iranians have been technologically advanced militarily ever since we began helping the Shah back in the 1970s.
Can I just add that if your viewers are interested, this week's Economist has a fascinating article
Yes.
on Beijing's role in the international petroleum markets and portrays that role. And I'm not an energy specialist, but portrays that role as much higher than what anybody except OPEC has been for the last 60 years. And it's a very interesting and worthwhile piece.
Cool. That issue of The Economist is sitting on my desk at home. I haven't gotten to reading it yet.
I want to read it after you do.
Okay. So one of the questions we got from one of the cars last night was how much of the Chinese strategy, both, and you were very clear in telling that they look at every aspect of foreign policy and every lever they can play. But how much of this policy do you think is that the Chinese are trying to appear stronger than they are? And how much of it is a bluff to get us to capitulate?
Well, I'm not sure that they expect that we would ever capitulate. I don't think China has any false hope about that. I mean, Bud may have a different reaction to that. But I think there's no question that the need to appear strong plays well for them in Asia, should any states there decide to take a different path than they're on right now of making nice to China. At the same time, it's very important for their domestic politics to make sure everyone understands that Xi Jinping and the party are in power.
So I'm going to come back to the power for a second. So I've seen a lot of articles in the past 2 years about problems with the PRC's economy. It's overbuilt in real estate.
Yep.
Its financial systems are not like they are in the West. So the question that was asked last night that we didn't get to ask is it's twofold. Is one, how does the PRC handle inflation? And the second one is, the follow-up to that is, are there price controls on domestic consumption?
There are definitely price controls. There have been attempts to back off from that. And again, the Chinese economy definitely is different than it was during the Maoist period when the party controlled everything. They have, in fact, engaged in some of what we would call reform in the last 50 years. But they do worry about inflation. I was in Beijing, I don't know how many years ago now, when an inflation report came out simultaneous with some minor level worker discontent around Guangzhou, which at that point was still the center of the export factories. And the party tried to respond to it as soon as possible. But do they have an intention to set everything under price controls? I don't believe so. They are mindful, and everything that I see them do goes to a Chinese phrase. Bud mentioned one last night, and I'm going to mention another one because I think it explains so much about China. They cross the river by feeling the stones, meaning that they address the problems as they come up and as they become unavoidable. And they will try something, and if it doesn't work, they're not afraid to say it didn't work and try something else.
There was one example, Mark, just last week, and China, of course, is now the world leader in electric vehicle sales, rather. And in fact, they've overbuilt the supply. So last week, the State Resources Council came out and lowered the profit margin that the EV vehicle makers are allowed to take in an attempt to lower the market pressure and increase sales again.
So do you think the Chinese population, because you mentioned this several times last night and in prior conversations, when Xi gets up in the morning, the first thing he wants to know is how much unrest there's been in the country. So how how unhappy is the Chinese population? And the question that was asked was, what can we do to make them more unhappy? So to create problems within the PRC without let's say military action.
Well, that's a two-edged sword, because if you make a population too unhappy, it can side with the government for fear of outside manipulation being the cause of the problem instead of the domestic government. How unhappy are they? It depends who you ask about that. I haven't been to China now for several years. I've not certain I would trust very many people. I no longer have access to classified information, but I'm not sure I would trust very many people to give me a statistic on that. But I do know that the party has responded to concerns about the model, which is the generalized term that they use of trying to base their economy on exports. They've tried to increase domestic consumption, but the population has historically never bought that. And the reason is that they're worried that the state support for things like healthcare, for housing, for all of the basics of survival in the 21st century could go away. Many people remember what happened under the Cultural Revolution, which was a chaotic period for China. So I think there's discontent. One measure I would just say is we do know that a lot of Chinese, particularly women today, are not interested in getting married. And no matter how many incentives Xi Jinping puts in front of them, they're not particularly interested in having more children to address the declining population. That must tell us something if we think about it.
I'll also note that population problem with women getting married and having children exists in Japan and South Korea. So it's not just Taiwan. So it's not just China. I'll also note from another aspect, the idea that we can generate problems among the Chinese population, I think, is a very weak read. And in fact, many years ago, when I was doing research in the Army Archives at Fort McNair, there was a report that every single CIA attempt in the 1950s and 60s to land agents to cause trouble in mainland China failed.
But let me interrupt you, because we're about to come up with a break here from our partner. You're watching the Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you. We'll be right back after these words from all of our partners. This is your Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you.
Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
Guys, we're back. This is the Veterans Impact Show. We're with two great experts on China. Dr. Bud Cole, United States Navy, a Commodore, which there are very few of those around, and his great wife, Dr. Cynthia Watson. You guys have written some books about this, haven't you? I remember in the previous conversations, you've got something you authored, some papers.
Well, I've written 9 nonfiction books about China and East Asian security and energy issues. And then I tried my hand at a novel written from the perspective of the commanding officer of a Chinese warship. More recently, I did sort of a autobiographical account of my time in Vietnam in the 1960s.
Where could somebody go and find your books? Are they on Amazon?
They are. Last time I checked, they're all listed on Amazon.
Okay, great. Mark,
I want to go to an interesting thing, because this has also been a subject of a lot of speculation. Back in 2023, there was a war game for the Center in International Studies, CSIS, I can't remember what it all stands for, called The First Battle of the Next War. And there are a bunch of different takeaways. The good news is that while it'll be a costly war to the U.S. and its allies, we would ultimately prevail in everyone but one of the 27 odd scenarios. But the question now becomes, is you were talking about yesterday or last night about the political reliability of the PLA and the People's Liberation Army, its Navy and its Air Force But also, there's another side to this, and that's the Taiwanese. So, talk about how you think that how well you think the Taiwanese would resist if they would, and how you think this would all play out should, God forbid, a kinetic war start.
Well, I really question the durability of the Taiwan will to resist. I think that it would require U.S. military intervention within 10 days to 2 weeks on the outside. Bit of background. In 2000, Taiwan passed two defense reform acts, which became into effect in 2002. And the two of the major elements of those defense reform acts was come up with an all-volunteer military, which they've absolutely failed to do, and also to civilianize the defense infrastructure. In other words, to stop the practice of most of the defense infrastructure civilian positions really being generals and admirals who take their uniforms off on Friday and go back to the office in civilian clothes on Monday. They've made some progress there, but I'm not sure how much. I haven't been in Taiwan now for 5 or 6 years. As far as the all-volunteer military is concerned, it became a joke until President Xi Jinping changed it. The draft was still in effect, but it required only 4 months service. She changed it back to a 1-year requirement, which is almost as big a joke, because when you took into account boot camp and okay, now you're leaving the military, you have to go home. It really, the 1-year commitment really amounted to not much more than 10 months. You can't train an efficient soldier or sailor or airman in 10 months. So what that all says to me is that the youth in Taiwan, the people of Taiwan, are not willing to join the military. And some of this goes back to what Cynthia said about birth frequency. If the family only has one son, that son does not want to go. They don't want their son going off and joining the military, particularly in time of conflict. He's supposed to be home protecting his parents. One of the other steps they took was to try to build an efficient system of reserves. That also was a joke, where the reserves were only required to serve 5 periods and 8 years of reserve service. That has changed and improved on paper, but so far, I really question the will of the Taiwans to fight.
So why is the U.S. sending or offering to sell billions to the Taiwan in weapons, and the Taiwanese paying for them through FMS? Because what you're telling me then is the chance of the Taiwanese lasting for 10 days before the U.S. could commit or make a decision to commit is a non-starter.
Well, I think there's several reasons. Number one is Taiwan is a functioning democracy, and we would like them to see them able to defend themselves. Number two, the Taiwan Relations Act passed in 1979 after President Carter shifted diplomatic recognition for China from Taipei to Beijing, requires us to provide defensive arms to enable Taiwan to defend itself. The idea of any sort of military balance across the Taiwan Strait was a valid question up until the early 2000s. There's no longer any kind of balance across the military strait, across the Taiwan Strait between the military forces of Taiwan and China. But we are legally required to provide arms to Taiwan. The problem I have is that we provide a wide variety of very advanced arms, but the Taiwan military personnel system continues to be unsatisfactory. Perhaps the most critical area is that of tactical air pilots, fighter pilots, if you will, although they cover more than just fighting aircraft designed for fighting. I haven't looked at the numbers in a few years now, but an American F-16 squadron used to have about 2-point-something pilots per airplane, or maybe it was 1.9 pilots per airplane. It was about 2. The Taiwan F-16 squadrons barely make 1 pilot per aircraft. And as you know, Mark, in any sort of long-lasting air-to-air conflict, you need more than 1 pilot for every airplane.
Well, that says a great deal. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is the global initiatives that the PRC has done I have a good friend, Ken Good, who was the ambassador to Paraguay, and he talked about how the Chinese are going into Paraguay, going into South America, going into Africa. And you mentioned last night about them doing that, and they would go in and say, hey, we'll build a port. We'll put $10 million in. We'll put $20 million. We'll buy 10,000 acres. And they are basically getting foodstuffs and tying things up around the world to have more of a global economy than just right there in China, so that sometimes sanctions wouldn't be as effective. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit about China's global initiative and what they're doing. For your global initiative, stay with Veterans Impact Show. Follow us, join us, be a part of it. It is your program, so let us hear from you. We'll be right back after these words.
Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
All right, welcome back. Mark and I were just telling helicopter jokes. You know, helicopter's not meant to fly.
No, I beat the air into submission.
Yeah. And I worked maintaining helicopters when I was in Vietnam on the Oriskany. That's neither here nor there. What's really important is the global initiative of the PRC around the world and what they're doing. And as I said, I mentioned that I know Ken Good, who was the ambassador to Paraguay. A statement he made, and I'd like for you to comment on this, was the PRC would come in and offer to build a port, buy thousands and thousands of acres of land. They would be producing crops, shipping them out. They were basically controlling the distribution, controlling the sea lanes, and controlling the agriculture in that area of Paraguay, as well as Brazil and Argentina. Breadbasket of South America. They're doing the same thing in Africa. Tell us what you know about that.
China first discovered the fact that the United States was not heavily involved in Latin America in the early 2000s. Cast your mind back, we were otherwise engaged in Afghanistan and ultimately in Iraq. China moves into places that it sees openings in order to advance its national interests. It's as simple as that. What's different is that China had neither the capacity, the money, nor, frankly, the knowledge to move into what we would see as our traditional partner areas of Latin America, or even the open area, because we were never all that involved in Africa. And that's what we've seen happen. Your point about China offering resources to build ports, to build arenas, to build roads, to build infrastructure, to fund schools. China uses, as I noted last night, every instrument available to it, and it helps that they have a lot of money right now that they can spend on that. The other side of that, however, is that the United States is no longer providing that aid. Americans don't like the word aid because they always assume that it's money that goes down a toilet and never provides anything back to us. But the reality is, for decades after World War II, the aid that the United States provided, humanitarian aid as well as investment in infrastructure, in places that have been largely left with no other way that they can develop modern societies, has meant China becomes a logical partner for them as we are withdrawing from that. That is a national decision on our part to withdraw, as it is a national decision on the part of the CCP to go into these other parts of the world. But specifically on your question of food, you are absolutely correct. As China moved more and more of its people out of very subsistence level agriculture into big cities to involve them in this factory production that has sent so many goods around the world, China became very concerned about the idea that they would be food insecure. Latin America today absolutely competes with us, as you say, not just the breadbasket, but a whole panoply of foods that China can't get any, or China feels less threatened that someone will cut them off from than if they were reliant purely on us, on Australia, or on Canada. So what the CCP thinks it's doing, and it's been doing this before Xi Jinping took power, but he's certainly advanced it, is China is trying to avoid any way that we could cut them off from food. And the states of Africa and Latin America are receiving support through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very much tied to Xi himself, as a way that they can develop their cities as well as some of their rural areas.
Let me just add, let me just add one thing. China and the United is about the same size as the United States. It has less than half the water resources and less than half the arable land as the United States.
Yeah.
So food security has got to rank very high among Beijing's priorities.
So we've got 300 and some odd million people in the United States. They've got 1.8 billion. Mathematically, is that 6 times? Huh?
Probably down more like 1.2 billion, because the number of the population is dropping dramatically. By the end of this century, so merely 74 years from now, China is expected to only have a population of 800 million. That's still going to be big, but that's a precipitous drop.
Is that the result of the one-child initiative?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
I didn't realize it was that precipitous. Want to come back to money again and defense spending. We in the U.S. spend, you can argue about whether it's direct or indirect, about 4% of the GDP. The Chinese claim that they're spending something less than that, and yet defense production in terms of ships and airplanes is mind-boggling. And when you actually use the yuan versus dollar rate, and you start doing some rough comparisons, okay, what does a ship cost in dollars? What is the same size type ship cost in yuan? It doesn't compute to 4% or whatever. Do you have any idea? So the question is, do you have any idea what what the real spending is in some range, and B, how long do you think their economy can support that?
Well, the official defense budget is 238 million. Excuse me, 238 billion. However, the best estimate that I've seen from a U.S. source is that it's about double that. It might be even more than that. The problem is not only the price controls that we don't have in this country. When you think about the cost of individual systems in dollars as opposed to what the Chinese government has to allow, or what the Chinese government does allow for a profit margin. But the other factor is the Chinese are spending a lot more money in their military budget because the economy is doing so well. I mean, for decades, the economy has been 5% GDP growth per year or greater. And a lot of times foreign economists say, oh, wow, the Chinese economy is really in trouble because the GDP is only estimated to grow 4.8 or 3.8% this next year. Well, in fact, it stayed fairly high, above 4%. We would be delighted if the U.S. economy grew at 4% instead of 2.1 or whatever it is this year.
Well, at a sustained rate.
Sustained rate, year after year after
for 4
year.
years.
So there's simply more money for the military to use.
Yeah, well, you had another interesting statistic that you quoted last night about the amount of money that the CCP is spending on internal security. Would you share that with us?
I don't have a real good number for that, but for the last 2 years, the American economists have estimated that even if the defense budget is twice 238 million or 238 billion, that the money they spend on internal security, the various internal security agencies, both national and regional, does exceed that. Now that includes some very hard to compute items like the maritime militia and other pseudo-military units, People's Armed Police and so forth. It's not clear as to the sources of their budget. It's also not clear as to what sort of financial and logistical support local capitals, regional, provincial capitals will provide for not only the PLA, but also for internal security matters. But it is indicative of how concerned Beijing is, as Cynthia started off by saying, with knowing about what's going on in the domestic arena and being able to control it if necessary.
Well, isn't the Communist Party a very, very small percentage of the total Chinese population?
The CCP is about the same size as the number of Christians in China, ironically, about 100 million of each. And I doubt there's a whole lot of overlap today between those two groups. But one of the more interesting things, and Bud indirectly alluded to this last night, one of the more interesting things Xi Jinping has done is talk about trying to raise the quality of individuals who join the party. I taught a course for several years at Cornell University in Washington, and a number of the students were Chinese, usually every year, 1 or 2 students. And it was very interesting to me. I realize it's a very small sample, but it was very interesting to me how many of the students would very honestly say that parents had joined the party, and this would have been between 2012 and 2022, but the parents had joined the party in order to give the children access to overseas education and greater opportunities into the future. That's the sort of thing that Xi Jinping is trying to shut down. He is trying to take China back to the ideological centrality of the party as being an important voice in people's daily lives. Doesn't necessarily mean that he won't allow them to move around the country the way they couldn't back in the 50s. But he very much wants a party that is dedicated to the party survival.
Okay, I got interest. I think it's interesting anyway. Another question about foreign policy. So we've noticed that Australia, and to some degree New Zealand, have taken a more prominent role in the internal security and the affairs of the island nations in Micronesia, Kiribati, and all those. But what do you think that Xi Jinping's next major foreign policy move will be?
Wow. Well, I don't know if I can come up with a single case, Mark, but I think that the relationship with they think the relationship with India is under control and improving. Mm-hmm. Definitely improving the relationship with Southeast Asia. Yeah. I think they are pretty confident about Moscow, although I'm sure there's concern about Putin's durability as leader. I think that, ironically, North Korea remains something of an unknown trouble spot for Beijing. During my very first visit to China in 1994, I was standing next to an American lieutenant general who asked the Chinese lieutenant general, "What do you think about the North Koreans?" And the answer translated as, pardon my language, as goddamn Koreans, you give them what they want and they just ask for more. You don't give them what they want and they just sulk. So I think the concern with North Korea, particularly under the present Kim family member, remains outstanding in Beijing's mind. As far as launching new foreign affairs initiatives, I don't look for anything major. They'll continue improving their economy. They'll continue improving relationships overseas. They'll continue taking advantage of others' mistakes. But I don't see anything really major coming out.
I would add one thing that we haven't mentioned, and that is I think that China will continue to push at Japan. They really are still stinging from the remarks that Prime Minister Takachi made almost a year ago now, or 8 months ago, about Taiwan and the possibility of Japan. Remember, Japan doesn't recognize Taiwan, but the possibility of Japan coming in on Taiwan's side should there be a Taiwan conflict. Beijing has been furious about that, and there's no indication that that has abated. And I think they will continue to try to press her.
Let me add one thing about Japan. That's a very important point.
Yeah.
The hatred for the Japanese, and I use the word hatred advisedly, goes back millennia.
Yeah.
And it remains greatly exacerbated by World War II and the Nanjing Massacre in 1937. Anything Japan does is going to touch a very raw nerve in China. The feeling also is shared by the Koreans as far as Japan is concerned. So that's always going to be a major concern of Beijing's.
So let me shift to the east. So Xi has spent some time meeting with Vladimir Putin. What do you think Xi's view of Putin is, and Putin's continued literally war with the West? And where do you think he's going with that? He being Xi.
I think he's very happy that the West has to pay attention to what happens in Ukraine. Anything that keeps us otherwise engaged from doing what we've now said back multiple administrations we were going to do, which was to pivot to Asia, has not happened because things keep cropping up. When you're a global power, you have global things that happen. And I think he's very happy about that. But I'm sure that he focuses very much on what would happen if Russia became even more unstable than it already is. And you got a very long border, a very porous long border with Russia. I'm not sure that would make Beijing very happy if that did in fact deteriorate. I don't know, you may have a different view.
No, I think that if Russia fell back into the sort of disorder it did in 1989 to 1992 or so, that the Chinese concern would be, as Cynthia said, border security, number one, but also a very strong effort to make sure that the energy reserves in Siberia remain secure and available to China.
Well, does that mean available to China, or China come in and take over the Siberian area where the oil reserves are and the oil fields are? And there are huge oil fields there.
Oil and natural gas, both around Lake Baikal. This goes back to one of my favorite instances in Russo-Chinese history. But first, the Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1666 and the Treaty of Aigun, I think it was 1758 or something. And the government was so, the attitude towards their ambassador who'd signed that second treaty was they executed him when he got back to Beijing. This was a treaty that basically ceded Far Eastern Siberia to Russia. And of course, that was one of the great Russian acquisitions during the 18th, 19th century. I don't think Beijing would hesitate to put troops north of the border if disorder was really rampant.
All right, let's talk just a little bit more about that, but we're going to have to bring this program back into the dock in just a second. I'm having a lot of fun. Mark, it's always great to have you on board. Cedric, I'm wish you were over here. My partner, Cedric White's super. He's training me. I need all the help I get. Hey, we'll be right back after these words from all of our partners. This is your Veterans Impact Show. Follow us, tune in, be a part. Send us an email.
Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
Hey, Mark, you were saying something?
Yeah, we were having a sidebar. So this is fascinating. And so I'm going to put you guys on the spot and ask you a very open-ended question. Okay, it's August 10th, 2026. Where do you see the U.S.-Chinese relationship going, not only over the next couple of years, but let's go 5 years out to 2030. What do you see happening, and how the competition is going to, between the two great powers, going to evolve? And then I want to come back after that question and go back to our friend in Moscow.
I think that what the populations of both states are facing are some common experiences that we're not particularly thinking about. And I don't expect that those common experiences are going to change a whole lot in the next 4 years. What I mean by that is literally this morning, China announced that it had evacuated 1 million of its citizens from flood-prone areas in Shanghai and Guangzhou. Those are two of the biggest cities in the world, and they are being massively affected by climate change, as is some of our country in terms of fires and other environmental threats, heat, everything else. The economies of both states are not providing exactly comforting projections into the future, despite tweaks that the governments in Beijing and Washington have made to our own and their economic models. So I suspect what we're going to see is a little bit, surprisingly, of a parallel experience for the average citizen. What will be the challenge is how the leadership in each of the countries handles that. And I don't know that. I will just conclude by saying that Beijing, I believe, thought when Mr. Trump came back to power that they had his number and that they could expect certain things out of the bilateral relationship. They have been surprised by the tariffs, I think, but they've worked around the tariffs. There's some interesting data that's out there that I can provide for you to give your listeners websites. But I think we're going to see some paralleling. The question is, can the leadership manage to keep us out of conflicts? And that's a tall order right now.
So
I feel more confident about what's going to happen in China than I do in my own country, to tell you the truth. I think Xi Jinping is going to remain in power till he dies or gets so sick that he resigns. And I think that from the outside, we will see initially a relatively smooth transfer of power to a new leadership. I can't begin to say who or what that's going to be, whether it'll be a triumvirate or just one guy. But I think it'll look smooth from the outside because the Chinese are so sensitive about that. As far as the U.S. is concerned, I yield to almost anyone as far as forecasting is concerned. I think the last 12 years, particularly, or 8 to 12 years, have been so inconsistent on America's part that I think the Chinese are simply puzzled. And as am I about what's going to happen next from the U.S. side. It's vitally important. It's going to be very important, of course, who wins not only the midterm elections in this country, but also the next presidential election. It could really go through a wide-ranging thing. The one thing I do hope is that we don't violate Hans Morgenthau's caution about letting a small ally suck us into a major war. And of course, I'm referring to Taiwan. I think the military leadership in Taiwan is very good and very sharp, and they very much appreciate the strategic situation that Taiwan is in, 105 miles from the coast. I'm not sure that all the political leaders in this country understand that strategic position as well as they should.
I'm going to make a political statement that I agree with you about the future of the United States. I am absolutely shocked as a Vietnam veteran, as an American, so many people that have made statements that are so inflammatory. It's like they want to burn this house down. That doesn't bode well for us.
So I want to come back to Vladimir Putin for a second, because I find the situation that he is in, and I realize this is not your expertise, but I want to look at it from, again, the Chinese window. Do you think that Xi is going to continue to encourage and support him, or do you think he's going to back off and just let things unfold without any involvement? Because we don't know what support he's providing to the Russians, but or at least I don't know. So where's your thinking on that?
Well, I think to reiterate their interest in the energy reserves, I think right now China's probably tentatively sort of satisfied with Putin's leadership. The war with Ukraine, I don't think is directly affecting China. And I think China is probably providing significant financial support and perhaps some technical military support to the Russian efforts in Ukraine. And I think as long as that remains at a manageable level, and I have no idea how much that is, that they're going to sit back and allow the conflict to continue. Again, it goes to the idea about if your opponent is making a mistake, don't interrupt them, because both Western Europe and the U.S. are providing such strong support to Zelensky and to Ukraine. Support I don't disagree with, but it does contribute to the conflict from China's perspective.
I think the only difference I would cite is, should Putin return to his many threats early in 2022 of using nuclear weapons, I don't think Beijing would be at all happy about that.
No, I think
And
I've got to interrupt because we got to bring this program into the dock. I got to tell you, I thank you so very much for being part of the Veterans Impact Show today. I'll always close with a prayer. Lord God, we just thank you for this great day, and thank you for this great conversation, and thank you for these two great people who joined us on Veterans Impact Show to give it an insight to China. Dear God, thank you for a hedge of protection around our active duty military, our first responders, and all of those serving in the United States. Thank you, dear God, for all of our veterans who are working together to bring this nation back together, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In your holy name we pray, amen. Thank you for being a great, great interview. Have a great day.
thank you.
Travel safe, get better. And if you ever come this way, Tex-Mex is on me or on us.
Thank you.